And over to Ethiopia, the country has announced that 30 senior police and intelligence officers, as well as civilians, have been arrested following the grenade attack on Saturday's rally in Addis Ababa. The officials are suspected of plotting to assassinate the Prime Minister and are also accused of showing reluctance in providing protection for the people and the country's leadership. CGTN's Girum Chala has more.
The arrest of the over 30 high police, intelligence and civilian officials is made in connection with the grenade attack on Saturday. The high-profile suspects include Addis Ababa City Police Deputy Commissioner Girum and the city's intelligence heads too. Also, the country's federal police authorities are among the people under serious investigation. Ethiopia's government sources have said the bombing incident, which claimed lives and injured many, is now treated as assassination attempt against Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And to quickly and effectively establish who is behind this and why, the government has announced it will now use foreign investigators and will also use state-of-the-art forensic equipment. Meanwhile, hospitals, sources around us have told us some victims of the bomb attack have recovered and rejoined their families, but a significant number of the injured are still in hospitals, some in critical state. Girum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, certainly a very dramatic weekend. Let's get you some perspective now on those attacks in Ethiopia and Zimbabwe. We're joined by Freddie Egesa. He is a regional security analyst from the Ugandan capital, Kampala, and Sinetemba Zonke, a political risk analyst at Africa Practice. He joins me from Johannesburg. Freddie, let's start with you in Kampala with the East African perspective. Of course, Ethiopia's Prime Minister has only been in power since April. What's your reaction to that grenade attack at a rally that specifically targeted the new Prime Minister?
In a small correction, I'm not against, I'm Charles Romshana. It's not the first time that you have had an attempt at assassination in Ethiopia. There was an attempt at Hosni Mubarak when he was still president, and now you have the second one in the capital city of Ethiopia. There is internal dissent, there is internal armed dissent in Ethiopia, and you now have a new prime minister who is coming on the heels of very serious suppression, where even villages were almost decimated because of the armed internal dissent. And the arrangement is akin to one you saw in Egypt, where there was an uprising, the military came in, but the military that came in was not comfortable with the regime that came in. So you now have interior line operations in Ethiopia, because it's now apparent that the security superstructure is not comfortable with the new prime minister that came in. But the problem that you have is that Ethiopia is a stabilizing factor, who is attempting at stabilizing the entire region, because you have problems in Somalia. Ethiopia was an intervention force initially. Ethiopia had issues with Eritrea. They have not stabilized. Ethiopia has had incursions in southern Sudan. It's trying to stabilize South Sudan, but they have not stabilized. So the region is volatile, and they would not want to be swallowed in this confusion because of high proliferation of weapons, the confusion you have in Yemen, the confusion you have in Syria. This brings in technology, this brings in military equipment. Therefore, this political solution that they had that brings in the new prime minister does not offer stability, and therefore you have dissent, but this dissent is within the armed forces itself. So well, you don't need to look at it as a mere crime, you need to look at it as a very serious wave.
Indeed. Well, Sinetemba, let's turn to you now on the question of Zimbabwe. Of course, this was supposed to be Zimbabwe's new dawn, but of course an explosion that rocked a political rally in close proximity to the new president, Mnangagwa. What's your assessment of this incident?
It's a worrying development that's happening in Zimbabwe. As we had seen over the years under former President Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe has had one of the most sophisticated intelligence and security regimes. So the fact that something like this can happen so close to a president is a very worrying development, and it shows that there are people who have got great insight into the security apparatus of the country.
Freddie, coming back to you now, as you mentioned, there's a lot of internal dissent in, or rather, Charles, I apologize, a number of state officials that have been arrested in Ethiopia. The attack is being looked at as an assassination attempt. What kind of security guarantees were in fact missing at that event on Saturday?
You cannot think of, initially you cannot think of internal security arrangements to secure these presidents until you have established both the interior and the exterior waves. First and foremost, you do not have very many countries in Africa that have condemned, one, this as an assassination attempt, and two, as a terrorist act. You have had it condemned in Southern Africa as a terrorist, by the Zimbabwe regime as a terrorist act, but you do not have individual African states condemning this. That's also true with Europe. You do not have European states as individual states condemning this assassination attempt and also as a terrorist act. The same is true with America. We've not had America coordinating condemnation of this. So what does this mean? It means you could be having another wave that is, because it is interesting, it was simultaneous, that you have an explosion almost killing head of state in Zimbabwe, and at the same time another explosion in Ethiopia almost killing the prime minister. Are we therefore seeing a new wave of changing African leaders through assassination attempts? In other words, you could see tomorrow improvement in technology and have other presidents killed. In other words, this could be a cover, it could be a stepping stone towards targeted other targeted heads of states. And we now need to look at it very. And what is its potential at creating civil unrest? Assuming the two presidents had been killed, where would we be? In Rwanda, Kagame overthrew, RPA overthrew Habyarimana. Kagame became vice president initially, but now he's head of state, having arrested his former head of state. The same is true in Southern Africa. The one who set up a coup in Zimbabwe did not become the president because you would have met a lot of resistance from the African Union and from SADC. So he chose to have Mnangagwa. But you could be having a move by the military to take over the reins of power directly, more especially if they are not very sure about the direction the population will take in the general election. So you now have, you've just been conversing about instability in Nigeria. You have instability in Egypt has not stabilized. So there is turmoil in Africa. Congo has not stabilized. You have issues in Malawi. You have issues in Mozambique. So you could be having another new wave of eliminating African heads of states through assassinations, but which are not condemned by Europe and America.
Yes, yes. I mean, indeed, it's very, very concerning to see two African leaders come under attack on the same day. Sinatemba, just turning back to that question of security, how is it possible that the Zimbabwean president was exposed to such grave danger?
It seems that with the new regime that came in with Emerson Mnangagwa, his security detail is not as robust as former President Mugabe's detail. He's got a smaller detail, and maybe they did not do the correct checks and balances that should have been done in terms of that rally. Again, after the attack, it doesn't seem that there was any actions to cordon off the area and make sure that everybody who was there is questioned and interrogated. So does not bode well for what has happened, but hopefully after this happens, they will beef up security to ensure that there is stability towards the elections on the 30th of July.
Absolutely. And Charles, coming back to you, of course, at this stage, there are certainly more questions than answers in Ethiopia and indeed Zimbabwe too. But in Ethiopia, what should investigators be looking at?
It's extremely very difficult to investigate an attempted assassination at the head of state, if you are going to use elements from within. Because you see the first line of targets are the police officers. This prime minister is different from the state. It's not like in Uganda where you have got a head of state fused with the state. The prime minister of Ethiopia is alien to the state, is not fused with the state. Is not like the president of Egypt. The president of Egypt is fused with the state. So here, if the state because you don't have complete state capture. The state in Ethiopia is captured by the security superstructure. So you now need to go and look at the smaller organ that is in control of the state, like they all have it here in Uganda. By the way, even in Uganda, we have got issues between the president and his police bosses. It's now the police that is under investigations. So you can't, because in the first place, how would the bomber, be able to access the prime minister, like in the two cases? Because even in Zimbabwe, you should be ordering the vice president, the one who set a coup against Robert Mugabe, as a suspect. He was around. How far was he from the center of gravity of the explosion? And as my colleague has rightly observed, how come that they did not cordon off the press, secure the scene of crime, including the various actors who were there? So you can't have a complete and thorough and exhaustive investigation. No. What you should now need to be looking at are the subsequent events. That these ones have survived, what next?
Indeed, and of course it's a mood of fear and uncertainty, particularly for Zimbabwe as they head towards an election. Sinatemba, what kind of risk factors need to be addressed following this explosion in Bulawayo?
One thing that needs to be done is that certainly security needs to be beefed up. I think that there will be observers that are coming in for the first time in 15 years from the EU. So I would say SADC and even and the AU needs to make sure that Zimbabwe is stable, that there is a lot of security, that there is stability to ensure that these actors who've tried to destabilize the country at the moment don't try to use other opportunities such as destabilizing the elections. So we need to see a lot more direct intervention by the Zimbabwean authorities. It will be hard, and because the key caution that President Emmerson Mnangagwa wants, he doesn't want to go back to the days where there was oppression and suppression of activities. But we have seen that all opposition parties have been given security. So that is good. That shows that they really want to see these elections going through. And even the vice president, the former general, has also guaranteed or tried to guarantee that the elections will be going through.
Indeed, and we certainly hope they are safe. Thanks very much to Sinatemba Zonke joining me live from Johannesburg, and Charles Romoshana joining us there live from Kampala for that analysis.